Here I stand on this spot at the crossroads of two centuries. You see, I run a 100-year-old family business that sells lumber and building materials to builders who build houses in California. I've been walking those lumber yards for over 57 years when my father was alive, and I've been running them for 27. I've learned a great deal about the industry and the lessons we need to chart the next 100 years, and particularly the next decade. My journey into the next century began in 1998 when I had the fortune to sit next to Professor Laura Strom, who taught environmental policy at MIIS. And she turned to me and she said at lunch, "So Bill, what's your environmental policy?" I said, "I sell wood. It comes from the forest. They replant. It's renewable, right?" She leveled her gaze and she said, "So are you going to stick with that answer?" Oh, my heart sank because that answer had never actually set well with me. In that moment, I awoke to discover myself surrounded by an industry lulled to sleep by the party line. You see, everything I had ever had came from the forest. My college degree, my clothes, our family's well-being, and I had been living in a convenient dream that allowed me to believe we didn't have an impact on our industry. This changed everything for me. I began to think about alternatives. And so I broke from the party line, and I became the first lumber yard in the country to sell FSC certified lumber as an option for our builders. What is that? That's wood that comes from sustainable, well-managed forests. And the FSC system was built out of the forestry wars of the 70s and 80s when radical environmentals were fighting with industry, and they came together with social groups and formed a standard that they could agree was good. And it started to transform forestry. Well, we were selling some wood, but it wasn't going so far. And I found this book. It was by Ray Anderson. And what it was is a book written by industrials who ran a billion-dollar carpet company in Atlanta called Interface. And he had envisioned how to make it a sustainable company and do it profitably. And this was the playbook on how to do it. And there was one core idea. It said that when business leaders grasp the compelling economic opportunities of sustainability, they can move more people and more resources than government and nonprofit can ever dream of. Now that was leadership, and I wanted to be a part of that. So over time, my team was humoring me on our sales. We were selling some wood, but I didn't have their hearts. So I conceived of an experience. I decided to take my entire management team. I rented 2 King Airs, and we flew up to the Pacific Northwest, and we spent 2 days walking through forests, looking at traditional industrial forestry and sustainable forestry. And on the second day, we stood over this clear cut. And it was an intellectual experience. And I said, "Come down here." And we walked down in, and the dust surrounded us. And we knew the impact our industry had on our planet. So at the end of the second day, I went to the edge of a beaver pond with the team. And I said, "Look, you may not give a hoot about what you've seen here today, or you may be moved. But what I want to know is, what are we as a company going to do about it?" There was silence. Then Kent spoke. And he said, "You know, Bill, when we came on this trip, I figured you were a 9 on the environmental scale and I was a 3, and we'd never be on the same page. But it turns out I'm a 6 and you're a 7, and we need to do this." And that began the transformation. That began our journey towards leadership in our industry. By 2003, we were recognized as the Dealer of the Year for significantly moving our industry towards sustainability. It's 2003. The article began, "Devil or Visionary?" It was about me, because I was the devil who was bringing our industry to address this question, and they didn't want to deal with it. So as my life goes, synchronicity is always at play. I was asked to chair the Forest Stewardship Council for the United States. And from this front row seat, I watched the power of consumer demand transform not only global markets, but global ecosystems. And today, 20% of the world's working forests are FSC certified. And we strongly believe that through FSC certification, we can solve 1/3 of the global carbon footprint challenge. And then in 2008, my wife and I bought our dream home in Pebble Beach. It was built in 2008, and we got sick. When I say we got sick, when we turn on the heat and we start to sneeze, then cough, then green stuff out of the nose, then tired, then exhausted, then fatigued. But we had a new baby. Who was not fatigued with a new baby? So we blamed it on that. But as time passed, we started to see unusual respiratory conditions and frequent hives and sensitivities to things that we'd never been sensitive to before. And as for me, over time, I could no longer hold a 10-digit phone number in my head long enough to dial it. I was so exhausted, I'd fall asleep in meetings. I couldn't find words. I couldn't think clearly. I began to believe I had been brain damaged, and I needed to sell my 100-year-old family business to support my family because I couldn't make the decisions I needed to make. In the midst of that, we decided to test, and we found significant mold and dampness inside the house, and we moved out, and we started to get better. So I did some research, and I found that the EPA tells us that half the homes in America are impacting people's health. Wait a minute, I'm a housing insider. How did I not know this? How could this have happened to me? So I'm going to ask you now all a question. How many of you ever wondered if your home might be impacting your health? Raise your hand. Look around and see how many hands are up. It's not a small issue. So how does it happen? When all the doors and windows are closed in your house, where does the air you breathe come from? Just a couple of answers. I'll repeat them. Plants. Where else? The house. Where else? Cracks in your boards. Vents. Right? Are any of those sources of fresh air? Not so much. So here's the basic problem. We heat. Air's rising. That air pushes to escape out of the upper half like a hot air balloon. It pushes. The replacement air sucks like a vacuum, bringing dust, dirt, mold, particles, the outdoor pollutants. They go through the walls. The walls become biology experiments, and the outdoor pollutants get concentrated inside 5 times higher than they were outside. This is an unintended consequence of traditional construction, but it defines the homes in which we live. So the homes are becoming a container of harm. They hold all of these pollutants, and then we bring cleaning supplies and personal care items in, and we have garages full of things, and we have buildings that are built out of heavily laden chemicals. And so our houses are impacting our health. How did we get here? How is this possible? When I ask a group of architecture builders, and I have asked thousands, they answer with the same level of naivete that this group answered with, which is stunning because these are the people entrusted with our health inside of our homes. We think governments and watchdog groups and regulatory agencies are watching, but on this issue they are asleep. And again, we wake up surrounded by an industry lulled to sleep by the party line. So I want to talk about the essentials of life. Air, food, water, shelter, and sleep, all of which happen in the house. We eat 3 meals a day. If you don't like one of your meals, you can pass. We drink 8 glasses a day. If you don't like one of your drinks, you can pass. We breathe 20 breaths a minute. That's 23,000 breaths a day. Try passing on your next breath. It's not an option. And by this, we are wired to believe we don't have a choice. So at this point, most of you are saying, well, yeah, it's all going to kill us. What do I do? You gave up your power. It turns out because 90% of our time we spend indoors. We're the indoor generation. The air we breathe, the toxins that we're impacted with are delivered inside the indoor environment. So if you change the air in your house, you change your health. There are 5 principles by which you can do that. The first is continuous fresh air. Second is properly sealed and insulated. Less toxic materials, because there's no such thing as non-toxic. Cleanable surfaces and healthy home habits. It turns out that 30% of what makes a house healthy or not are our own habits, our own impact. So I'm going to talk for a moment about continuous fresh air. And why continuous? Are we not continuous breathers? Yes. So you don't want partial fresh air. Right? So if you take the container and you say, well, it's a container that can be harmful, let's make it the protector, so let me make it tight, let me make it tighter, and then let me add ventilation. And when you do that, lo and behold, it becomes an oasis of longevity and well-being. Can you imagine fresh air ventilation as a 21st century innovation? Bit stunning, isn't it? So this is an example from my own house, because we built a house to the principles, and we 2,000 hours making sure all the materials were the lowest possible off-gassing. And so we decided to test, and this is what it looked like using total volatile organic compounds as a measure. Nice, right? Then we turned the ventilation off. Why? Because most new houses don't have ventilation. Most houses are tight. And in 2 days, we had 5 times the accumulation. And let me tell you, that's a headache-creating environment. And within an hour with the ventilation back on, suddenly we're back down at low levels. Now, those little spikes that you see are the daily living. Delphinia and the twins get up and walk around. We cook, we do stuff. If we had no ventilation, those spikes would be half as big as the big one. But when you have good ventilation, they're low, which means it lowers the weight of exposure on your body, leading to greater wellness. So change wasn't happening fast enough. So I reached into the quiver of my past experience and pulled from the FSC bag. And we invented Hayward Score to harness the power of consumer demand. We also looked at fresh air, ventilation, and its impact on cognition. Now, we all know that it impacts cognition. For how long have we been saying, I can't think clearly, I just need some fresh air? As long as we've been in buildings or classrooms. Well, it turned out Harvard studied that, thankfully. And what they found is in the average building, in the air quality inside the average building, classroom, school, work environment, home, this is the level that you could measure cognition using a 45-minute cognition test. And when you improve the air, reducing CO2, VOCs, and particles to what would be called gray air, cognition improved anywhere between 60 and 260%. Look at the categories: crisis response, breadth of use, strategy, frontal lobe capacity. They also found in a corporate environment, by doing fresh air strategies, that productivity improved by 12%. And using wearables, they could determine that people went on to sleep better at night. Well, there are progressive companies like Google and Facebook and Hayward Lumber and the Defense Language Institute who are implementing fresh air strategies to get at those productivity gains and cognition gains. And what struck me as an employer is that the air I provided during the day went on to affect our people's quality of sleep and quality of life at home. So there we are with Hayward Score, launched. Consumers love it. If you take 10 minutes and you answer 50 questions about your house online, it's free. It'll diagnose your house. It runs through a complex set of algorithms that look at indoor-outdoor pollutants, your behaviors, activities, weather, age of house, anything that has to do with health. And then gives you a 5-page report that tells you what's impacting your health and how to fix it based on the climate you live in. Well, that's cool. But what's amazing is we track 23 medical symptoms. We're now the largest study on health and housing ever created. If there was doubt, it was because there weren't so many studies. There are studies, but there's never been 70,000 studies. We have revealed the truth about health and housing. The genie's out of the bottle. So what have I learned in my journey towards accelerating transformation? It began with an awakening. And then I discovered sustainability, and I saw the power to access 13% of the market. Okay. And then through FSC, I saw the power of consumer demand to transform global markets and global ecosystems. And then we got sick, and I discovered the power of health to access over 60% of the market. And equally importantly, the power of me, you. It happened to me. I want to take care of my family. The power of health to create urgency because we need to drive change in 5 years at scale. And from that, we saw that if you made all homes healthy, they would become energy efficient. And if all they were energy efficient, you'd solve 1/3 of the global carbon footprint. And if all homes were healthy, based upon Hayward Score calculations, we would save $700 billion a year to the US healthcare system. So now we have a way to pay for it. And if homes were healthy, the demand for unhealthy chemicals would disappear. And that would be good for all of us. So whether you believe in climate change, or too many plastics in the ocean, or too many chemicals in the environment, at least on one of those topics we can all agree transformation needs to accelerate. And to unlock that, we need an asset class big enough to move the planet. Well, housing has taken America out of every recession in our history. And housing, most recently, drugged the world economy into a recession. So we have an asset class powerful enough to move the country. So take back your power. Exercise your choice. You can do this. By exercising your choice, you have the power to heal our planet. You won't be called the devil, as I was 20 years ago. You will join the pantheon of heroes that had the courage to act in our time of need. If not for yourself, do it for your family. If not for your family, do it for your friends. If you're an employer, do it for your employees, because you have the power to do that for them. And if not for that, for the story you want to tell your children. Awaken the fierce urgency of you. Wake up from the convenient dream and act. But if a man's reach exceeds his grasp, what is a heaven for? My name is Bill Hayward, and my calling is to transform health by transforming our living environments. I'm here to empower you to heal the planet by healing your home. Thank you.